What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to Studs and Duds, the most comprehensive NFL player review series on the internet. If you are new here, just a quick synopsis of what this series is all about. So this series goes back to when this channel began as a Madden channel, and I would use the ratings changes from my own custom Madden roster to discuss the rising and falling players around the NFL. And while I no longer make Madden content on this channel, the series has stuck around because it has shown to be a fun and effective way to discuss what the film says about how these guys are playing in real life. So today, you are going to be seeing those ratings changes going up and down on the screen for you here today. And we are going to be doing the AFC South today. My goal is to get our remaining 2 episodes left on the NFC East and AFC West done before free agency next week. And just a heads up, I will be live right here on YouTube, giving you all of my reactions to NFL free agency on that first day as all the Shefty news bombs start dropping in. Also wanted to let you guys know I'm going to be doing a free agency podcast on the Fully Inflated Football podcast. If you aren't followed to that, you can find that link in the description down below. Going to be doing a best fit free agent signing for all 32 teams. Going to be a fun episode. Looking forward to seeing you guys over there on the podcast. But let's go ahead and get started today with the Indianapolis Colts. And for their super stud, the highlight player for each team, I couldn't pick one. I settled on this young combination of players in the secondary, a Colts secondary that has really struggled to find some of those core pieces. And as the season went on this year, I know Gus Bradley is on the way out and this defense had their frustrations, but a lot of these guys actually really did play well. We're talking about Jalen Jones, Sam Womack, Nick Cross, especially, including Jalen Carleys as well, who's kind of a linebacker, box safety, weak side linebacker, passing downs type of rotational piece there. But all these guys played their role pretty damn well. I'll just kind of start this off with Jalen Jones. Just such a high IQ, instinctive player, not the most lockdown coverage guy or anything like that. I feel like we've been talking a lot about him over the last 2 years, though, just how good his hand-eye coordination is, his ball skills. He's one of these kind of splash play defensive backs where when he is in position, he's really good at making plays on the ball and disrupting receivers at the catch point. Jalen Jones finishes this season with 10 pass breakups, 2 interceptions, a reception percentage allowed of 65%, did allow 727 yards on the season. Again, he's not a shutdown player, but I do think they've found a CB2 here in Jalen Jones. It's just funny that really the one time Chris Ballard didn't draft a defensive player off of freaky physical traits and went off of the tape, which Jalen Jones had great tape out of the SEC as a true junior coming out, just didn't have those testing numbers. The one time they didn't draft off of the RAS scores, they found a starting defensive player. So he deserves to be in this super stud conversation. But Samuel Womack as well, who was drafted by the Niners to play slot corner, ended up getting hurt and kind of lost the opportunity to not just start for them, but make the team because they inevitably replaced him or decided to replace him with a bunch of other dudes that they brought in this offseason. So he doesn't make the team. And the Colts pick him up. He ends up winning a starting job on the outside, a guy that previously profiled as a slot corner. He steps outside and shows his headiness in this zone forward system. Again, 7 pass breakups, 2 interceptions on the season, 61% reception percentage, very average for a starting corner. So not a shutdown guy, but definitely contributed in run support with that slot background. He's a very physical player, a good tackler as well. A 10% missed tackle rate for him is very solid for a starting corner. I do think they will consider a corner in the first round or second round with Lou Anarumo coming in. He values cornerbacks, certainly. But these 2 guys stepping up does give them the flexibility to maybe roll into next year with these 2 guys and say, well, if the board doesn't fall right or free agency doesn't fall right, we have some options as starters. Or if they do go with a Will Johnson or Jahdae Barron or someone to bring in a real number 1 corner, you have really a bounty of options now in the secondary. Of course, with Kenny Moore still in there as well. And then Nick Cross as well, back on the safety position. Year 3 for him, but he's only 22 years old, entered the league really, really young, and he's just figuring things out, man. He's been tackling very consistently, been a huge impact in run defense. Felt like he was the only guy from the middle of the field that could consistently wrap up and be a player in run support. But he ends up with 5 total passes defended, 2 pass breakups, 3 picks as well. Made some good plays in coverage. That aspect it's still coming along, but he's going to go from a 72 to a 74, following up next to Jalen Jones, who went 74 to a 76, and Sam Womack from a 73 to a 75. So all kind of in those sort of like baseline starter ratings for all of these young members of the secondary, and hopefully just the beginning for these 3 guys. And then I guess we might as well just talk about Jalon Carlies as well and finish up the defense. Kind of a differently structured conversation here with me being unable to pick a super stud for the Colts. But yeah, Jalon Carlies, very small sample size, right? Coming in for 15, 20 snaps a game as kind of a weak side backer, some dime coverage looks and that kind of thing. But a consistent tackler on the season. And you can see that safety background translating to some of those coverage roles. Week 18 against Jacksonville especially, they were going after him, hoping he would find himself out of position. And, on 3 targets, he does allow the 3 receptions, but only for 14 yards, keeping everything underneath him. In that one game, ends up with a PFF coverage grade of 90.3 on those 4 coverage snaps. So obviously PFF coverage grade is probably the least accurate of the grades that they put out, but anytime you're over 90 and you're in the blue, it's like you're clearly doing something right. So just kind of the flashes from the project coming out of Missouri, who played safety in college. But definitely has the athleticism to develop into something more, and a guy to keep an eye on. We'll see what Lou Anarumo kind of has planned for him heading into year 2. But honestly, beyond Carlies and those members of the secondary that I do think had nice seasons, Colts need more from their front. These linebackers really struggled. Latu had a couple flashes in the middle of the season and then cooled off again. It's not that he was bad, but didn't burst on the scene as a kind of defensive rookie of the year type of candidate. Not really. Kwity Paye still hasn't come along. Like, the guys up front were who they were. No need to really lower those guys. But just not a ton to talk about with the Colts defense in their front 6-7 players. But let's talk about the offense. We'll start with Anthony Richardson, who did just have like the absolute most roller coaster season you could possibly draw up. In our last recording, mid-season studs and duds was right around the time Anthony Richardson got benched. He was really struggling, lowered him down to a 68. Fast forward a month later, they move on from Flacco, starting for them, and go back to Anthony Richardson. And coming off of the benching, I do think he responded to it well, enough that I'm ready to give him 2 ratings points back. I think especially just the sort of decision-making and comfort within the offense to just know where to go with the football, that certainly felt better. Wasn't all great in terms of the accuracy and some of the turnovers and the fumbles, and there's still obviously so far for Richardson to go. He's just a 70 rating here. That's going to leave him as one of the lowest rated starting quarterbacks in the league. But I do think he at least showed that he could bounce back, turn things back into the right direction. And then the last couple weeks, against Denver, not his best game. And then week 16 against Tennessee, he gets hurt again. So it's like, dude, can this guy just stay healthy and build upon something? Because anytime he starts to look good for a second, he's either hurt or regresses. It's just been, again, roller coaster frustration with Anthony Richardson. But he's going to get a +2 here. Obviously, just the biggest of seasons next year for year 3. He's only got 400 dropbacks in his entire career. 2 years, that's not enough. So we got to see more from Richardson. It's just going to be wait and see, really. Kind of back to square one with where we were heading into the year, I think, with Richardson just a year later. But there are some guys on the offense stepping up. Alec Pierce, the wide receiver, the Colts basically tried to replace him when they drafted Adonai Mitchell, and he said, I'm I'm going to step it up. I'm going to be that vertical presence that you drafted me to be. And that's exactly what he did. In the last 9 weeks of the season, he had 18 receptions, which doesn't sound like much in 9 weeks, just 2 catches a game, but 389 yards and 4 touchdowns since week 10, a 22.1 average depth of target. He was truly this team's sort of Marquez Valdez-Scantling true deep threat type of role there. You just don't see a lot of receivers with a 22.1 average depth of target, but he wasn't Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He had just 1 drop on those 18 receptions, which when you are a vertical target, you're going to get a higher percentage of drops, and that's been an issue with Alec Pierce. So, Alec Pierce, forgive me. But I do think Pierce has established himself at this point as that role in this offense. He takes the top off the defense, and if he just continues to do this, which there's really no reason to believe heading into a contract year next year that he can't, that just opens everything up for the run game and the underneath stuff for Josh Downs and Michael Pittman, who can hopefully get healthy next year. Might as well talk about him. I have a note on him. Didn't change Michael Pittman's rating here, but obviously a really poor season for Michael Pittman. Just kind of a complete non-factor. They tried to get him going. He was battling through a back injury all year long. And for a guy that, physicality is such a big part of his game, I'm going to cut him some slack, but it's something to note, like, can he get that explosiveness back? We got him in an 83 rating. He didn't play up to that this year. Cutting him some slack, not going to lower him, but we'll have to keep an eye on that heading into next season. But let's talk about the offensive line here. The rookie center, Tanner Bortolini, looking like a good pick, and at this point in time, about a week away from free agency, we can kind of lump this together with the conversation on Ryan Kelly, who's going to go down too, at 32 years old now for the veteran center, Ryan Kelly. Kelly just only played 10 games this year. The injuries are adding up. Just a down year by his standards, by all the metrics. With the way Bortolini played, coming in as a really nasty run blocker, I think was even a little bit better as a pass blocker than you could expect, considering he just wasn't good at that at Wisconsin, and NFL coaching, whatever it might be, he held up a little bit better as a pass blocker than I certainly expected. When I found out he was going to be starting, I was like, yeah, the run blocking shouldn't be a problem for him. He's a just nasty, athletic, sawed-off shotgun of a center that loves to run block, but shorter arms and did lose one-on-ones in college quite a bit. Not that he never lost, but, held his own in pass protection. Anyway, I think the Colts are looking at this and saying, hey, I think we can roll forward with the young Tanner Bortolini and let Ryan Kelly go. And that's a hell of a find on Tanner Bortolini there on day 3 of the draft. He's gone up 4 ratings points on the season. Far from established as a reliable starter yet, but I think he can get there. So 66 to a 68 for Bortolini. And then again, Ryan Kelly is going to come down to 82 to a 79. Just at this point, he's a 32-year-old center that misses some time. He's still a playable player and all that. He's still a solid starting option when he's able to play. Again, the efficiency just down a little bit for him. And then the last guy on the offensive line to talk about there is Matt Goncalves, another rookie. I don't know that he's necessarily someone they're looking at as like a potential starter. They did draft him in the 3rd round, so maybe they do. He had his ups and downs coming in, but they needed a lot from him. He had to play on the left side of the line earlier in the year when Raymond went down, and then later in the year, Braden Smith goes down, and he had to play right tackle. So he had some rougher games against like the Giants and the Bills, the Vikings, but he had some really good games in there too against the Jets and the Lions and the Titans. So like up and down very much so, but what was pretty steady for him was the run blocking, where he showed he can move people. Man, he's 6'6", 330 pounds. And they didn't miss too much of a beat with him stepping in for some good tackles as well. So to have him as a swing guy, or maybe they look at him as a potential guard for to fill in for Will Fries, who's a pending free agent as well. Nice swing tackle / 6th man on your offensive line, if nothing else. We haven't really seen any guard action from him, but at his size, I think he could handle it. So definitely someone to be well aware of. Wasn't really very much on the draft radar. I never watched him at Pittsburgh. He missed pretty much all of his 2023 season, and then the Colts spent a third-round pick on him. I was like, whoa, I didn't even know who this guy was, to be honest. So they obviously really like him with that draft pedigree, and again, someone to really have on your radar to see what his development could look like here. So +2 for Goncalves out of Pitt. And then the only guy left to talk about here is the punter, Rigoberto Sanchez. Had a fantastic season. He was top 10 in hang time and yards per attempt. So +4 for Sanchez, 74 to a 78. Okay, let's talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Their super stud was a pretty easy decision. Brian Thomas Jr., rookie wide receiver out of LSU, had just a monster season. I loved Brian Thomas Jr. This was one of my favorite picks in the entire draft, where they got him. Not to mention they traded down and got more draft capital. One last little send-off from Trent Baalke. Maybe the best move he made as a Jaguar was this Brian Thomas selection and trade down. But as much as I loved him, I didn't think he would be this good this early. Just the complete package, man. Short game, intermediate game, vertical game was less of a surprise. He was so good at that at LSU. But just catching everything, the run after catch. He was a guy that just had more of a limited role at LSU, so I didn't know if you threw all of this on his plate, if he was going to be able to handle it. But he's out there with a backup quarterback still making plays. I mean, he is every bit a potential alpha number one, like top 5 to 10 wide receiver in the NFL if he keeps up at this rate. Guys his size just aren't supposed to be that fast and as fluid of movers as he is. So you pair that potential with a guy that comes into the league, puts up almost 1,300 yards and 87 receptions, 10 touchdowns. He's a freak. Again, it was a very easy choice for super stud there on Brian Thomas Jr. Let's stick with the offense here. Not everybody's going up here for the Jags. We got Travis Etienne is going to lose 1 ratings point, and I don't fully know what to do with Etienne because he really was just battling through injuries this year, but it just was a really bad season. I mean, 3.7 yards per attempt, just 17 missed tackles forced on 150 attempts. That's just not going to cut it. Heading into his 4th year, basically a contract year. I can't remember when the 5th-year option deadline is, but I cannot imagine they would pick that up on him. And I just don't think there's a lot of energy that he's the guy for Liam Cohen either. But I do still view him as a talented back that if he could get healthy and kind of play for a new contract, we're seeing the RB market just explode. So maybe some extra motivation for him to make some real big money here in a new offense, rejuvenated and all that. I'm not quite ready to give up on Travis Etienne, but it is a situation where you look at just abysmal production this year. You can excuse it away a little bit for the injuries, but if we start off next season and he's just not making guys miss and is low in terms of yards after contact and yards per attempt and all that like he was this year, you're going to see this rating kind of plummet and us start to actually write off Travis Etienne a little bit. But on a more positive note, the young Parker Washington, Year 2, 6th-round pick out of Penn State, someone that I definitely thought was a value where they got him. I think I had a 3rd-round grade on Parker Washington. He's an interesting guy to look forward to next season. So he ends up getting a massive increase in his target share when Christian Kirk gets injured. And then as the year went on, Gabe Davis was Gabe Davis and just not really seeing the football. So between those two things, Parker Washington gets out there. What was interesting to me is, Washington at 5'10", 210 pounds, played a lot of slot at Penn State, definitely projected as the Christian Kirk replacement. So when Kirk goes down, it was just in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, it's go time. Put him in the slot, let him cook. It's not what happened, really. I mean, he did play from the slot a little bit, but he actually got most of his receptions on the outside, which was just kind of interesting to me. Had a huge game against Houston, 6 catches for 103 yards, week 13. And a lot of that was on corner routes and comebackers and stuff, making some tough catches down the field as well. I still don't think that's how his skill set best projects. It was more just fascinating that he stepped outside and did that. I think you look at this team next year, and with that kind of Chris Godwin, Cooper Kupp role coming in Liam Cohen's offense, there's room for Parker Washington to kind of take that and run with it. Playing, again, a lot more from the slot than he did down the stretch when he was playing more for the Jags. He wasn't like crazy productive or efficient or anything. It's just a +2 ratings bump. We're going from 69 to a 71 here. He had 390 yards on 32 receptions. Really basically not playing this year until about, week 13. But definitely someone to keep an eye on, right? We'll see what they do with the offseason and the draft and all that. But the skill set is there in this offense to kind of, if you don't want to say Chris Godwin, say he could be a little bit more like what Jaquan McMillan was in some ways. Not quite as fast, but I think a similar skill set in terms of catching those crossing routes and being tough after the catch. So, maybe let's just end this by saying a mini breakout watch for Parker Washington heading into next season, depending on what his opportunity might look like. But also getting some target opportunities down the stretch with Christian Kirk getting injured. Evan Ingram was injured. Brenton Strange really steps into the lineup and really started getting peppered with targets. Look, Brenton Strange was an egregious reach, and he belongs on the list of reasons why Trent Baalke had to go. He just hasn't worked out as a second-round pick, but he did some stuff, right? Like, he gets 12 targets against the Jets week 15, comes down with 11 receptions for 73 yards. It was all like underneath stuff, and I don't think we saw like crazy dynamism or anything like that, but I think he showed strong, consistent hands in that game. And then against Indy, he goes for 60 yards, 4 for 4, showing a little bit more efficiency there, but getting a little bit more involved in the receiving game. And I don't really know. I'm not ready to call him a starter or anything like that, but showed some stuff. A +3 jump for Brenton Strange, who's now gone up 4 ratings points on the season. Then on the offensive line, Walker Little had a really nice year. He's going to get a +4 for his efforts, 71 to a 75. So entering that kind of comfortable starting level for a tackle. I know 75 doesn't sound like a crazy rating, but for a young player that hasn't really until now been given that starting job, it's a really good starting point. Look, they trade away Cam Robinson, showing confidence in Walker Little. He gives up just 5 pressures in 5 games, signs a contract extension. They kind of give him the Jordan Mailata deal, if you will, where you're like, all right, really like what you see. We think the trajectory is there for you to be a franchise left tackle for us. And then he gets hurt. Again, like this has been the thing with Walker Little, is just not being able to stay healthy. So if he could just stay on the field, I do think you're talking about a guy that has all the traits to be a franchise left tackle. You got to go way back, like 4 or 5 years ago? He was in like top 10 mock draft, like way too early mock draft positioning, misses that final year at Stanford, and he's been good whenever he's on the field. It's just he's not on the field enough. So I like Walker Little, just got to keep him healthy. But with him getting hurt, Cole Van Lannon, former 6th-round pick for the Green Bay Packers here in year 4 for the Jags, he stepped in and, look, he held his own. I think as a backup tackle, former Wisconsin Badger, these guys, when in doubt, by the way, if it's the 6th, 7th round of a draft, if there's a draftable prospect out of Wisconsin, Penn State, Michigan, Notre Dame, just take them, because more often than not, those guys find a way to at least be capable backups in the league. Cole Van Lannon is looking to be next in line in that category. And then on a more negative note, Mitch Morse, the veteran center. I don't have too many notes here, but his efficiency was down this year. He's been trending in this direction for a long time. He's all right. They signed him as an aging Band-Aid out of Buffalo, but did have to kind of drop down a little bit for some age regression, if you will. Let's talk about the defense. Starting with the interior defensive linemen, these 2 guys out of LSU. Nothing crazy, but Mason Smith, 2nd-round pick, and Jordan Jefferson, 4th-round pick. Starting with Mason Smith, he comes into the league as a just totally young, developmental, like Trent Baalke pick, right? The length, the athleticism, that whole deal. And at first it was, he's super raw, struggled, in every bit you probably could have imagined. Like, all of his negative notes as a prospect were showing up. Wasn't really getting after the passer. Wasn't contributing as a run defender. As the season went on, though, started to show definitely some more signs that he can get there. And, from a run defense perspective, he is still a disaster. His pad level was bad at LSU. It was bad in Jacksonville. Like, he has got to learn how to defend the run better if he's ever going to be more than just a third down pass rush specialist. But at least the pass rushing stuff did start to come on a little bit. I watched that Week 16 Raiders game for him where he had 5 pressures and a sack, and he was really hard to handle for some decent interior offensive linemen for the Raiders. I mean, he's got crazy quickness for a bigger interior player, at least a taller one. So he's got a nasty swim move, but he actually started to put on some bull rush and really was an impactful pass rusher in that game. So really just for that game alone, he's getting a +1. Consistency is just not there for him. But if he could ever put it together, you do have a very high upside athletic player, and I'm excited to see what year 2 brings for him. And then Jordan Jefferson, round 4 out of LSU, no pass rushing profile to speak of at all, but he does have a really heavy motor, a high running motor, and he's strong. So like those two things packaged together, and he's a decent run defender. So he's going to get a +2, 65 to a 67. I don't think he's this big upside player, high upside player, but deserves some credit. He held his own as a rookie run defender, which not every 4th round defensive tackle can say. Trayvon Walker is going to get a +1. The steady incremental growth for him continues. Honestly, with Walker, I continue to be really underwhelmed with his pass rushing profile, but this year he did really step up as a run defender, getting to put his hand in the dirt much more in that, oh my God, I already forgot the defensive coordinator's name. He's already going to be on his 3rd team in 3 years. Ryan Nielsen. Yeah, geez. But Trayvon Walker, that was the thing with him going 101 in the draft. It was like, well, at least he's going to be this elite run defender. And frankly, he just hasn't really been that in his first 2 years. He's been all right. But this year, I think you really felt his presence in that phase much more. Career high in PFF run stops and total tackles. PFF run defense grade goes from a 49.7 last year to a 69.2 this year. Again, not elite, but at least much, much better doing what you drafted him to do, put his hand in the dirt, set that hard edge, and get off blocks if guys are going to run his way. Definitely beyond the PFF grade, you just felt it more watching Jags games. So at least that's coming along, but I will say, like, the pass rushing stuff on Trayvon Walker still isn't there. He had that Week 5 game against Indianapolis that we raved about in the last episode of Studs and Duds, and it's like, that is the vision. That's the dream for Trayvon Walker. Like, you watch that game against the Colts, he looked like Myles Garrett, which is like, that's the utopian view of what Trayvon Walker could be with his physical traits when you spend the 1st overall pick on him. And in that game, like, yes, 7 pressures, 3 sacks, and you watch those pressures, it's like, dude, he was unblockable in that individual game. Then Week 6 happens, and he just goes straight back to being basically the old version of Trayvon Walker. 10% pressure rate is fine, but not first pick in the draft good, right? Like, as I've always said, 10% pressure rate is like the baseline of what you're looking for in a starting caliber edge player. Like, that is the baseline that you want for if he's going to be on the field for getting starting reps. That's it. That 10% pressure rate is like the bare minimum requirement. And that's where Trayvon Walker was. Of the top 25 snap getters in the NFL, the only players in the NFL with a worse pass rush win rate than Trayvon Walker were Chauncey Golston and Andrew Van Ginkel for the Vikings, who aren't true pass rush players. They're on the field because Golston's a great run defender, and Van Ginkel is this hybrid linebacker type. Those are the only 2 guys out of the top 25 that had a worse pass rush win rate than Trayvon Walker. And yeah, he's going to end up pretty high in pressures, pretty high in sacks because he was 5th in the NFL in pass rushing snaps. But despite being 5th in pass rushing snaps, he was 22nd in pressures. So you can see the inefficiency there in his game. He's fine. He is a completely fine number 2 edge player. The incremental growth has been there. The flashes have been there. But we're heading into year 4 now. Like, come on, like, let's get this really going. And if he really was as good as the 101 pick needed to be, Trent Baalke probably still has his job. And it's pretty hard to see what Aiden Hutchinson is doing, who basically had as many pressures and sacks in 5 games this year as Trayvon Walker did the entire season. So that's where I'm at with Walker. He's all right. Let's move to the second level of this defense and talk about Foye Oluokun. I don't want to bang on the guy. He changed schemes this year. It's been very much that 3-4 defense in Jacksonville for a while. They go to a 4-3 system. He plays a lot more weak side linebacker with Devin Lloyd next to him, and the tackle numbers dropped off. He just wasn't as impactful as a linebacker. His missed tackle percentage did jump up 3% this year. So it's just a -1, 83 to an 82. I do think if he went back to the old system, I don't think there's too much on film that says he's that much of a worse player, but he's getting a little bit older, and I just felt it was fair to lower him a little bit for not being quite the top 5 to 10 linebacker in the league that I had him rated at this season. And then into the secondary, some young guys are playing well. Jarrian Jones, the rookie out of Florida State, was just way better than I thought he would be. He's just a nasty playmaking style slot corner. He's boomer bust in his coverage reps, but man, when he jumps balls towards the sideline, towards the flat, you can see the acceleration and just the ball skills. He loves to hit and play run defense. Did miss a bazillion tackles. He had a 23% missed tackle percentage this year and a PFF run defense grade of 88.5. So, like, that is a yin and yang deal right there. If he can clean up the tackling, you are talking about something like, you think of these guys like Mike Hilton and Quan Williams always comes to my mind, going back about 5 years ago, but just these elite run defending slot players that are just a pain in the ass to deal with. If he can clean up the missed tackles, I do think it's in there for Jarrian Jones. I don't know if he's ever going to be this like stable coverage player, but again, can make plays when he's in position too. So I like what we saw from him as a rookie. He's going 71 to a 73 for this session, but a +6 on his rookie season. And then Monteric Brown. I don't think you're pounding the table that he should be a starter next year, but he held up okay. I think he's a decent CB4 to have in an emergency situation, which they were in this year. So he had a nice year to kind of, former 7th round pick for the Jags. Nice year to kind of establish himself as depth heading into year 4 for them. And then the kicker, Cam Little, goes a +4. The rookie kicker, he missed 2 kicks all year. He was a fantastic rookie kicker. But let's move on to the Houston Texans, and their super stud was a pretty easy choice as well. It's got to be Derek Stingley, just bursting onto the scene, showing his true potential as a top 3 to 5 corner in the NFL right now. And if he repeats what he did this year, I think we will put him into that conversation with like Sauce Gardner, who was famously drafted with the pick after him. Stingley's just a little bit late to the party, right? Stingley finally had an elite season. Sauce had 2 in his rookie and sophomore season. Sauce wasn't quite as good as Stingley this year, though. And then Pat Surtain, who was Defensive Player of the Year. So if Stingley can repeat what he did this year, you're going to be talking about him in that elite territory. But just to get him into that, true alpha, number 1 corner, top 3 to 5 corner in the NFL territory, big deal for Houston. He ends up finishing the season with a reception percentage of 45%. Guys, if you see a reception percentage that starts with a 4, you're talking about a guy that had one of the best seasons in the league at that position. Anything in the 50s is pretty damn good. So 45% reception percentage allowed is outstanding. He ends up with 11 pass breakups and 7 interceptions, gives up just 3 touchdowns and 456 yards. I mean, seriously, this was right there with the elite cornerback seasons that you'll see. And let's just see him go out and repeat that now next year. If he does, again, we can put him in that top tier of corners. But right now, he gets a +7, 82 to an 89 rating. Just a monster season right there in the top 5 for cornerback ratings for me. But let's talk about the offense here. Nico Collins just keeps going up and up and up. I don't know if and when this is going to stop for him. He's up to a 92 rating now. That's a +6 on the season, following up his emergence as a premium wide receiver last season. I mean, the dude's just insane. He does everything. He separates to all three levels. He catches everything. He wins contested catches. He's great after the catch. He's outstanding in scramble drill. That's one of my favorite things about him, is when Stroud does get flushed out of the pocket, he's got that kind of Travis Kelce chemistry with Nico Collins. He's just truly an elite wide receiver. Doesn't get enough conversation, frankly, as being in that top 5. I'm not saying he's better than Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, but I do think he makes a strong case to being a tier 1 wide receiver. If he didn't miss time this year, his production would put him up there. And A.J. Brown, of course, we can't forget about A.J. Brown. But Nico, I think his tape over the last 2 years puts him right in there. And I think it's only a matter of time that it becomes a streamlined conversation to put his name in there. But we're going straight to the offensive line after that. No change with Stroud or the running backs. I think we got them kind of properly rated. I'll continue to defend C.J. Stroud. I think he was just fine this year. There's a lot of people that would say his rating needs to come down from an 84. I think it's a good spot for him. He played well with a garbage offensive line here. The only offensive lineman going up for them is going to be Jarrett Patterson, the young center for them. He did play pretty well. Not crazy efficient or, lockdown or anything, or this outstanding run blocker or anything, but for a former 7th round pick out of Notre Dame. Remember what I just said? Take the Notre Dame guys, take the Wisconsin guys. Here we go again. Jarrett Patterson exceeding his draft position. And if he had to start at center next year with all of the other things they got to clean up, with the guards especially, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. If nothing else, though, he's a guy that is a great backup to have. But next to him, Shaq Mason is going to come down. I mean, he's just up there in age, right? Will turn 32 years old, but he's not just, physically old, but he's played over 11,000 snaps in his career. That's a crazy number. So just a lot of wear and tear on his body. But he had the least efficient season as a pass blocker, his lowest graded season ever as a run blocker. He's still a playable option. He's not a turnstile or anything like that. And they did extend him before last season. So, I wouldn't be surprised if he's still starting for them next year. But I think with what we saw this year, you got to start setting some plans in motion to find a long-term option there at right guard, because I just don't know how much football Shaq Mason has left in the tank. And he actually missed. So he's only had one season since his rookie year. So going back to 2015, there's only been 1 year where he missed time. That was 2020. And later this season, he started to get a little bit banged up. So I don't know if that's just bad luck or because he's getting older, but you get the point at this point. Maybe we'll be back, but time to start putting some other plans in motion there at right guard. He's been a nice enough player for them coming over from Tampa. But that is actually all I have for the offense on the Texans here. On the defense, Tim Settle had a career year as a pass rusher, man. I love Tim Settle. It was fun to see him getting after the quarterback this year. He's an interesting player. He's got tiny legs, tiny ankles especially. Doesn't really anchor all that well as a run defender, but they let him loose as a pass rusher. He had a career high 43 pressures this year and 5 sacks. In his previous 7 seasons combined, he had 72 pressures. So, they do a good job with stunts and stuff to take advantage of his quickness with those light legs. So it's not all just, destroying one-on-one reps and stuff. A lot of it's scheme, but still a nice year. He goes 72 to a 74. Good to see that for him. Inversely, the veteran, Falorenzo Fatukasi, was brought in. And just, man, I think he just got his money and stopped trying. I really do. He was so good with the Jets. The Jags paid him based on his tape, which was really good. He sucked for the Jags. He sucked for the Texans. How can you not lower him, man? He gets moved around in the run game. Hasn't really been a pass rush factor. He's down to a 71 after being a highly paid free agent just a few years ago. And then Danico Autry, I'm going to lower him. I know Texans fans are like, really? Did you see the playoff game against the Chargers? Yes, I did. He was dominant against the Chargers, just nasty bull rush. But outside of that, you look back on his entire season, an older player, going to be 35 next year. The efficiency just wasn't there throughout the course of the season. It's great to know that it's in there, that he can still have big games, and a 77 rating is still respectable for him, especially at his age. So yes, I saw the Chargers game, but I still think you look back on the season, and with his efficiency, he had to come down just a little bit down to a 77. But then Will Anderson, so he's kind of an interesting conversation because I think you look at kind of the last 6 weeks of his season, and it was the first time where I've really felt like pointing at my screen like, yes, there is the potentially elite pass rusher, Will Anderson. He's kind of like steadily climbed since he came into the league as a kind of a blue chip, high-end prospect, and he's been just a remarkable run defender from day one. Like his instincts and technique and quickness against the run absolutely plays. But he's kind of just been a good pass rusher, not a great one, for the first season and a half of his career. And then week 12 happens against the Titans. His 4 pressures and 2 sacks in that game just took over, but it was the Titans. He had a huge game week 6 against New England, week 15 against Miami. Like, even during the season, he was either kind of quiet or just eating against horrible offensive lines. But then the playoffs happen. And the Chargers game, he was everywhere. 6 pressures, 2 sacks against Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. Like, good players. Arguably the best game of his career, in my opinion, was in that playoff game. And then he gave Patrick Mahomes and that that offensive line fits as well. Not the best tackle competition there, but 3 pressures and 2 sacks against the Chiefs as well. So, I mean, 9 pressures and 4 sacks in his 2 playoff games gets me really excited for year 3 of Will Anderson. I think he's a great player. I still think he's got another gear that we saw a little bit late. We saw in some of those flashes against really bad competition in New England, Tennessee, Miami, like whatever. You're beating up on horrible tackles. Like, yeah, you're Will Anderson. You should do that. But I'm excited for next year to see if he can kind of have that leap to be one of those tier 1 edge rushers, because I don't think he's there yet. But +1 here, he's up to an 84 rating. And then at linebacker, they got to find some linebackers, man, low key. Azeez Al-Shaair was all right. He's going to be a starter for them next year. But, Henry To'oTo'o, I say that, but he's going up, +2, 68 to a 70. He's on his Blake Martinez career trajectory. He deserves some credit for his run defense instincts and awareness and technique and all that stuff. They're playing him because they have to. None of these other guys have either been healthy or stepped up. Christian Harris missed most of this season. I don't like Henry To'oTo'o. I think he's a liability in coverage. He misses way too many tackles, but he has had some good games against the run. As a third linebacker for earlier downs, he's okay. Again, a 70 rating is nothing crazy here, but he does deserve some love, but shouldn't really be viewed as a starter. Kind of a roundabout conversation there. But let's go back to the secondary. We already talked about Derek Stingley. Kamari Lassiter as well, he had a phenomenal rookie season. So he gets a +5. He's gone up 6 on the season, up to a 78 rating now. I mean, he was probably the highest floor. Well, it's interesting, right? Because you can't really say any corner that runs in the 4.6s is a high floor prospect. That was always an element of risk. It's just hard to play this position if you don't have that makeup speed. You just have to be really consistent with your technique, your mind. You have to anticipate so well if you're going to be a slower corner in the NFL. But Kamari Lassiter's tape at Georgia told you he could do that. He's quick as shit, and he's super smart, and he's tough, and it translated in this system. I don't know if he's going to go too much higher than this. We'll see, obviously. He even had some games as well where he was getting beat and giving up, more than you'd like to see. But, dude, you make him your number 2 corner opposite of a shutdown Derek Stingley. You can't ask for a much better option than Kamari Lassiter. I mean, the ball skills are immaculate. He ends up with 6 pass breakups, 4 interceptions on the season. And some of these picks are like really intense, like ball tracking, ball skills moments, going over receivers, making just crazy plays. the dude, he just is a football player. He's got those instincts. So I love the kind of vision for him as the perfect role opposite of a Derek Stingley, and the way they use him in this system, just kind of playing him opposite, top down coverage. You know, read the quarterback, use your mind, use your quickness. It's just fantastic. So we said Stingley was an obvious super stud candidate. He was, but other than Derek Stingley, Kamari Lassiter could have been highlighted as the super stud, and they've got obviously a dynamic duo now of corners to build around. And then to make things even better and more exciting for what this defense could look like, obviously those corners and what we talked about with Will Anderson, D'Amico Ryans just has this culture really clicking. The way this defense looked in the playoffs last year, it was a championship caliber defense. And they also seemingly hit on Kalen Bullock, their third round safety, who they take would have been the next pick after Lassiter, right? And they threw a lot on his plate. They want him to be that deep, rangy cover safety so that they can use guys like Petrie and Ward kind of in the slot as a slot corner and all this stuff. So they asked Kalen Bullock to come in as a very raw, young, athletic free safety and patrol the middle of the field. And look, it was boom or bust. I'm just going to say it. Like, he has a long way to go before I am ready to say, yes, Kalen Bullock is a star safety, but he did have 5 picks, 5 pass breakups. It is clear when he sees it and he triggers, he's got the ball skills, he's got the speed, he's got the range, he has incredible upside, and I wouldn't expect really any young free safety to come in and just have perfectly sound coverage on the back end. They let him take risks, and there were games where that paid off. And there were games where you're cringing a little bit with the amount of busted coverages, and he just has to find that right balance before he's penciled in as this star safety. His rating's only a 72 here. You know, again, PFF coverage grade, I almost don't even want to reference it because it is just not a good metric by PFF. They would even admit it, I think. Like, they have a lot of improvements to make to that specific grade, but when you see a guy has a 36.2 coverage grade on the season in the red, and you watch the games, and a lot of times when you're seeing these explosive long plays happen and coverage busts, and you see 21 and teammates kind of looking his way like, hey, what are you doing? Where are you? Like, it's real. Like, he's got to improve this stuff, but the flashes, the high-end plays, and even some of his stuff in run defense was really exciting too. He missed 17% of his tackles. He's got to clean some of that stuff up, but potential's there, man. Really excited to see what year 2 looks like for him. But let's now finish up with the Tennessee Titans for their super stud. They actually had a couple of decent options here, but I'm going to go with Peter Skoronski, really settling in here in year 2, especially as the season went on. He goes the last 7 games of the season allowing just 5 pressures. Like, that's crazy. If you're less than a pressure a game, you're doing something right. You're doing something really, really right. And his PFF pass blocking grade, which is a metric, unlike coverage grade, that I do like. I think it projects well and is accurate. From week 10 on, 85.4 PFF pass blocking grade. That was number 1 in the NFL for guards from week 10 onwards. So really settled in. And he's battled through some stuff. The position change, what was it? An appendectomy in his rookie year, coaching change. So to see him now at the end of year 2 with this guy that was a really just absolutely sound prospect, not the craziest traits or anything, but I still think he could play tackle, but at this point I get it. Like, he's just been so good at guard, and the run blocking stuff hasn't fully come along with him. But I think he can really lock in next year as like an all-pro guard, which God does this team need it. But you hopefully get Cushenberry back healthy. Year 2 for Latham. Like, that center to left side, we'll talk about Latham in a minute. You're hoping that can be a strength of this team next year. And from what you saw from Skoronski, there's really no reason to believe this is going to slow down. So he gets a +4 from a 74 to a 78. And I think that we'll have him pinned as a guy that's going to get into the 80s and beyond next season. We just got to continue to see him producing at this level. But on a negative note, Tony Pollard, he's going to get the -1 on the U-turn adjustment here. We praised him big time in the last episode. He came out the gate and while Saquon and Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs and all these other backs are stealing the show, Tony Pollard actually came in as well and was another one of these acquired running backs from the free agent market. Joe Mixon, another one that was just bursting onto the scene, literally. I mean, in the first 9 weeks of the season, he was awesome. He had a 23% missed tackle forced rate, more than 4 yards after contact, 4.04. Second half of the year happens, though. That missed tackle forced rate cuts almost in half, down to 13%. The yards after contact drops more than a yard, down to 2.93 yards after contact, which is just kind of like average. And he fumbled twice. So, I still like what we saw, but kind of like we saw in Dallas. Is he a guy that can't handle a full workload? Probably. Still a good season. Still going to be a net positive on the season. I think he started at a 80 or an 81, but just going to lose 1 ratings point down to an 82. Calvin Ridley as well. This signing actually worked out pretty well for the Titans, despite the frustrating moments he had in Jacksonville and even some of the drops he had in Tennessee here. Calvin Ridley is Calvin Ridley. He's never going to be a true number 1 guy, but he is one of the best number 2s in the league, and I think kind of reestablished himself a little bit as that here in Tennessee. They peppered him with targets kind of in the mid to late part of the season, and he returned dividends. He had some big moments, gets over 1,000 yards on the season. He's a good player. He's had his frustrations, obviously, but once you kind of stop overhyping him and just take him for what he is, he's a good player. He's a separator that's going to have some drops and some, maybe some lackluster moments in terms of keeping his feet in towards the sideline and winning contested catches, but much less of that this year than he had in Jacksonville for sure. He actually had a 46% contested catch win rate, which was, certainly better than the 36% he had last year and the 25% contested catch win rate he had back in 2021 before the gambling suspension. So doing some good stuff there. +1 for Ridley. And then Chig Okonkwo. God, I want him to emerge as a star tight end so bad. Unfortunately, it didn't happen this year. They spent the first 15 weeks of the season, or at least the first 14 weeks, and then week 15 happens, and all of a sudden it's 10 targets, 8 receptions, 59 yards. 9 targets, 9 receptions, 81 yards. 6 targets, 5 receptions, 42 yards. They woke up and were like, oh yeah, Chig Okonkwo is actually a really good, 2B piece to force feed targets to when you got your backup quarterback in there. He had just 1 drop on the season on 67 targets, came down with 5 out of 8 contested catches. It's just, you look back on the year, and he just didn't do anything until the end of the year. And he was quiet, of course, last season too. So I got him at a 75 rating. Found out from his Twitter he's a RuneScape enthusiast. That's pretty fun. But heading into a contract year for Chig Okonkwo, I'm more so calling on Coach Callahan to figure this guy out, because he can separate. He's incredible after the catch. There are ways to use him as a blocker. Let's get the Chig Okonkwo year 4 breakout, because I do think he's capable of it. Can only raise him so much when it was just a couple games where they actually wanted to use him. But we'll see. And maybe there are just some of those limitations with his size. He's 6'3", 238, so he's hard to implement because he's not really a full-size, true inline tight end. But come on, Tennessee, let's go here. Let's start to tap into the high-end strengths that you do have, and finding ways to weaponize Chig Okonkwo has shown to be a strength. You just got to get a little bit more creative. But let's go to this offensive line that, at right guard and right tackle was a nightmare, especially at right tackle. We'll talk about Nicholas Petit-Ferrer. But J.C. Latham at left tackle was certainly better than I projected him to be. Now, you watch that Houston game, and you're like, oh, that's why TFG said he was going to be a bust. He can't protect the corner. He can't move his feet. Week 1, same deal. There were a couple games this year where you're like, oh man, that's a guard playing tackle. But there was a lot more good on his rookie season. He's getting a +2 ratings boost, and I was wrong to call him a bust. I kind of you're a draft analyst, you see some stuff, you want to kind of call your shots where you believe it. I didn't believe in him as a left tackle, and he certainly exceeded my projection of him. He had a lot more solid games. He had a couple like genuinely good games out there, and just kind of looked the part. I want to see in the run game, I want to see him and Skoronski in year 2 together, in this system together, get things sorted out. I think they just struggled to navigate clutter a little bit. Guys crossing their face, miscommunications, that kind of stuff. You learn to work with these guys next to you. He has the upside to be an outstanding run blocker, and Skoronski as well, with what we said, trying to get into those 80 ratings, being a better run blocker himself. Like, those two guys together are really something to keep an eye on. Like, can that become a staple duo? I don't want to end this on a negative note. Like, I just don't think J.C. Latham has the feet to be like a Tristan Wirfs, who's like an elite pass protecting tackle at 330 pounds. Like, it's obviously tough to go through J.C. Latham, and he weaponizes that well. I still don't think he's ever going to be like this exceptional pass blocker, but if he can just be a okay to good pass blocker and then take big strides as a run blocker, like, you will absolutely take that with where the Titans drafted him. So, we'll give J.C. Latham some praise for a solid rookie season. But Nicholas Petit-Frere, it reached a point, like, after just a couple starts, because he was so bad last year too. Like, I destroyed this guy in the Titans deep dive, like, saying you can't play this guy, and they just continued to play him. And I'm like, what is Bill Callahan doing? I thought he was this offensive line genius, and they just kept playing him, and he just kept getting beat. So Nicholas Petit-Frere, I think I've always said the worst player in the NFL isn't necessarily the guy that sucks and then gets benched, or the guy that just doesn't play. To me, the worst player in the NFL is the guy that is playing and actively hurting your team. Nicholas Petit-Frere just kept playing and just kept actively hurting this team. It's so bad that I typically, if you're rated as a 64 overall player, I usually don't touch your rating in Studs and Duds because it's just not worth discussing. Petit-Frere was so bad that I had to drop him into the 50s. The fact that he's, didn't get cut, it just blows my mind. And he's still on this roster. Heading into next year, I would be stunned if he makes the team. I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, he's out there like as a fantasy football analyst. He got suspended for gambling. Like, he doesn't give a shit about learning how to play this position. Why would you waste a roster spot on that? It's very clear. Like, he wants to go be a fantasy analyst, and maybe he's a great fantasy analyst. I don't want to dunk on him for that. But clearly doesn't care about developing as an offensive tackle. So anyway, he was second worst in the NFL in pass blocking efficiency. The only player that was worse than him was Fred Johnson for the Eagles, who qualified because he got a start against the Bucs for the Eagles, like week 4, and then he played that week 18 game when all the backups were in, and he technically just qualified. So Fred Johnson was a little bit worse in pass blocking efficiency than Nicholas Petit-Frere. But again, Petit-Frere was actually starting for this team for like 2/3 of the season. It's horrible, but the roast of Petit-Frere will end there. The guy that they did eventually turn to was John Ojukwu, who came in week 16, and he was better than Nicholas Petit-Frere, former Boise State guy. We'll see. I don't think he's their starting right tackle or anything, but should come in as their backup tackle, I think, if he's under contract next year. But he deserved a little bit of praise. There's your Titans offense. Let's talk about this defense. While it was a frustrating year for the Titans, and I feel like they have a long way to go in terms of like finding identity and who they want to be, this interior defensive line actually did show itself to be one of the best in the league. Now, Sebastian Joseph Day, who we'll talk about, is a pending free agent. He had a really nice bounce back season. Just a couple years ago, he was a highly paid guy coming out from the Rams. But let's just talk about him first, and then we'll talk about Sweat. But yeah, he signed a 1-year deal with Tennessee and got to play here next to Tavondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons. And he got back to being that impact run defender. There's not a lot of, it's a good defensive tackle draft class, but there's not a lot of guys in free agency. It's like Poona Ford. It's just not a long list. So I wouldn't be surprised if Sebastian Joseph Day gets a decent amount of money. And if I'm the Titans, I want him back. This to me was a identity of this team, was this trio of Sweat, Joseph Day, and then of course Jeffrey Simmons, who was just awesome. Jeffrey Simmons, like he is. No need to change his rating or anything, but I would want him back. But T'Vondre Sweat was sick, dude. Like, seemingly all of those concerns, those character concerns of him coming out of the draft, he became a pro and nipped it in the butt. Like, it seems to be pedal to the metal, all forces go with T'Vondre Sweat, and that excites me because, like, I had a top 40 grade on T'Vondre Sweat. I went as far as saying he is, as a prospect, what Jordan Davis is now for the Eagles, like 3 years into his career, because Sweat is Jordan Davis's age. They just had different breakout ages. But anyway, I think you compare what T'Vondre Sweat did for the Titans and what Jordan Davis did for the Eagles this year, it's like eye for an eye. Like, that was kind of spot on for what I was talking about, is just a dominant run defending nose tackle up front that can two gap and then can also create some pressure, push the pocket a little bit. And Sweat had some good moments as a rusher this year too. Also had one of the highlights of the year where he picks up a football and puts a stiff arm on a guy, irrelevant to how good he is as a nose tackle, but still fun. I'm just a big fan, man. I'm really excited to see him and Jeffrey Simmons grow together. I think Sweat can be something like a DJ Reader for this team as one of those peak top one or two nose tackles in the game. And just what a great pick he was. They gambled on the character. He was there in the second round, and we didn't know. We didn't know how far he was going to go after he had a DUI just a couple weeks before the draft. But maybe he went out to party one last time and then gets to the NFL and he's good to go. Or maybe he is doing stuff behind the scenes and he's just able to manage it. You know, you're allowed to go, drink and partake in legal activities. You just got to be responsible about it. So I just love to see it. And let's talk about Harold Landry, which is a negative conversation. He's going down 2 in the ratings. So Harold Landry had the worst pass rush win rate in the NFL. He was below a 10% pressure rate. Quite frankly, was one of the worst pass rushers in the NFL this year. He could not get after the quarterback, getting up there in age. He had the big injury a couple years ago, and he just doesn't have that juice anymore, man. And he's a guy that's always relied on his bend and his athletic ability to rush the passer. They're trying to trade him. I don't know who the hell would want anything to do with this contract. The only reason he's still a 76 is he's still a kind of savvy run defender and has played so much that he knows what he's doing, and he still plays physical in that sense. So he's not useless as like a third edge to play some early down work. But yeah, dude, he can't rush the passer, and I think they're inevitably going to have to cut him. So he's getting a -2. Let's wrap this up with some members in the secondary. Jarvis Brownlee. It's funny that this team fired their GM. And I know Borgonzi, right, the Chiefs GM, he's like known as a superstar, so I can't really fault them for it. But it is kind of funny. Like, they actually had one of the better drafts, and then they fired their GM. But anyway, Jarvis Brownlee, what a find in the 5th round. And I don't know that he's going to be a starting corner. I think he maybe can be. He's not the fastest guy. He's not the twitchiest lockdown cover corner. And he gave up a 68% reception percentage. That's getting up there. 663 yards. Like, he was beat a decent amount as a cover player, but I just kind of fuck with him. Like, I love his instincts and his physicality. Some of the plays he makes against the run, like, he's taken on like offensive tackles and tight ends. He's just got great instincts around the box. I wouldn't mind seeing if he can put on like 10 pounds and play safety, because he's a really physical, heady player. There could be a future for him there, but I think he's just a football player, man. And that's what his tape showed too. He was nasty at Louisville. He was at the Senior Bowl, like, it was funny. Like, he was guessing routes in the one-on-ones. He basically said, well, if I just come out and try to guard these guys in one-on-one reps at the Senior Bowl, I'm going to get diced up. I'm going to try to just guess what route guys are running and try to have some highlight plays. And that's emblematic of his play style at corner too. So I like his approach as a dime back, as a potential safety. Again, I don't know that he's ever going to be a starting corner, but he showed some really good stuff. Ends up with 6 pass breakups and a pick and a bunch of really explosive plays, either popping guys after the catch or coming down and getting involved in the run. So I think he's a fun player to have in your secondary, and for a 5th round pick, you'll take that any given day. And then Mike Brown as well, 220 pounds safety, been in the league a couple years, undrafted here on this Titans team, and what stands out to me is he's got 44 tackles going back to limited playing time last season. He's never been a full-time starter or anything, but he's racked up 44 tackles and has missed just 1. He is a 2.2% missed tackle rate, just been super steady as a tackler, and he ended up starting the last 2 games of the season and kind of held his own back there. So I like what we've seen. He started at chunk 2, week 9 to week 12. So they've started to throw some more opportunities as a backup safety on his plate. And I think at least as a backup, he's a nice player. Obviously a good special teamer with his tackling ability and just a nice find for what he is. So +4 up to a 67 rating. But that is going to do it for AFC South Studs and Duds. Thank you guys for watching. Please do hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not for some reason, so you don't miss the remaining Studs and Duds. And then, of course, all the draft content heading your way as well. Please do hit that like button on the way out. Let me know in the comments as well if you think I missed on anybody. Was I right or wrong on the analysis? I want to hear from you guys down in the comments. But thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. We are going to do the AFC West next.